You've heard it 1,000 times. Medieval people died at 30. But that number is a lie hiding a much darker truth. The average was dragged down by children who never saw their 5th birthday. So what happened to the ones who survived? They lived to 50, 60, even 70. But here's the real question nobody asks. What did those survivors carry with them? And why did a noble's child have a fighting chance while a peasant's never did? The full story is stranger than any myth. Watch the complete video. Link in description. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine Iran, not as you see it on news maps, but as it was 1500 years ago. No call to prayer. No domes. Instead, fire burning in stone temples, messengers racing across royal roads, and an emperor called the King of Kings. That world is gone, but its echoes still whisper through history. Before we begin, please subscribe to Little Historical and give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Before any king carved his name into stone, before any palace rose from the dust, there was only the land. And the land was not kind. Imagine a place where the sun does not simply shine, it hunts. Where the summer heat presses down like a slow, deliberate weight, and the winter cold slips into your bones before you even realize it has arrived. This was the Iranian Plateau, a vast, unforgiving stretch of mountains and dry plains that seemed designed to test the very limits of human stubbornness. Water was a whispered prayer. Shade was a rare gift. And yet, people came. They arrived sometime during the 2nd millennium before Christ, part of the great Indo-Iranian migrations, carrying little more than animals, weapons, and the quiet determination to survive. They did not build cities. They built something far more fragile: trust. Life was tribal, small groups scattered across the landscape, herding whatever could endure the land's moods. Leadership was not about birthright or divine favor. It was about competence. If you could keep your people alive through one brutal summer and one freezing winter, you earned the right to speak. If you failed, the land would remove you faster than any rival ever could. But even in this harsh arithmetic, something deeper was taking shape. Around campfires at night, staring into flames that held back both predators and despair, they began to tell stories. Stories about truth and lies, about order and chaos, about forces that could not be seen but could certainly be felt. Fire became more than warmth. It became a symbol of purity, of light, of something that refused to be extinguished no matter how dark the world grew. And slowly, almost without noticing, these scattered, exhausted people began to realize something. The land was testing them, yes, but it was also forging them. Every death, every hungry winter, every whispered argument over who had the better patch of dry grass, it was all preparing them for something bigger. Something none of them could yet name. The Medes would be the first to try. The Medes would be the first to try. By the 7th century before Christ, they had done something unusual in a land built on scattered loyalties. They began to organize. Not perfectly, not without bloodshed, but enough to turn a collection of arguing tribes into something that resembled a kingdom. They settled in the northwest, where the mountains offered a little more mercy than the open plains, and they built a capital at Ecbatana. According to whispers carried down through generations, their first king, Deioces, offered the people something they had almost forgotten existed: justice. No more endless revenge cycles. No more waking up to find your neighbor had taken what was yours because you had taken something of his the year before. It worked. The Medes grew strong enough to challenge the Assyrian Empire, the great bully of the ancient world, and when Assyria finally fell, the Medes stood at the top of a very dangerous hill. But here is where the story takes a quiet, almost invisible turn. Within their own shadow, another people had been living, paying taxes, and keeping their heads down. The Persians. Unremarkable, it seemed. Just another group waiting their turn. Except history has a cruel habit of hiding the future in plain sight. The Persians had something the Medes did not fully appreciate: patience, and a leader named Cyrus. No one knows exactly when Cyrus decided that he would no longer kneel. But around 550 before Christ, the silence broke. Cyrus rebelled, and the war between Medes and Persians was not a long, grinding affair. It was sudden, sharp, and final. The Median king was defeated, and just like that, the masters became servants, and the servants became masters. But Cyrus did not celebrate by burning cities or enslaving the fallen. He did something far more unsettling. He let the Median nobles keep their positions. He let their priests keep their temples. He did not erase them. He absorbed them. And that quiet, almost unsettling mercy would become his deadliest weapon. Because when Cyrus turned his eyes toward Babylon, toward Lydia, toward every corner of the known world, he did not arrive as a destroyer. He arrived as a liberator. And people believed him. That is the kind of power that does not need to shout. The kind that watches, waits, and then simply takes everything while you are still deciding whether to be afraid. From that strange, merciful ambition, the Achaemenid Empire was born. And it would not stop growing. And it would not stop growing. But an empire built on conquest and mercy still needs something deeper to hold it together. Something invisible. Something that seeps into the minds of both the ruler and the ruled, whispering that order is not just useful, it is sacred. That is where the fire comes in. Long before Cyrus, long before the Medes, the people of this harsh land had looked into flames and felt something they could not explain. Not just warmth. Not just light. But a presence. A silent witness that consumed lies and left only truth behind. By the time the Achaemenid Empire stretched from India to Egypt, that feeling had grown into a fully formed belief system called Zoroastrianism. And at its heart stood a terrifyingly simple idea. The world is a battlefield. Not between armies or empires, but between two opposing forces that have existed since before time began. On one side, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, Light, and all that is orderly and true. On the other, Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of chaos, darkness, and every small lie you tell yourself when no one is watching. Here is the part that still unsettles. Zoroaster, the prophet who saw this vision, taught that there is no neutral ground. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every quiet decision you make in the privacy of your own heart, you are either feeding the light or feeding the darkness. That is not a distant theology. That is a constant, intimate pressure. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your smallest failure to be honest, your tiniest act of selfishness, is a victory for cosmic chaos. The priests tended sacred flames in temples where the fire was never, ever allowed to go out. Not during storms, not during invasions, not when the keeper of the flame grew old or sick or forgetful. Because if the flame died, even for a moment, it was as if truth itself had flickered and nearly vanished. And death itself became a quiet, almost unbearably tense ritual. Corpses were not buried or burned, because that would pollute the sacred earth or the sacred fire. Instead, they were placed in open towers called Towers of Silence, left for the sun and the birds. Clean, they believed. But also cold. Also lonely. Also a reminder that the battle between good and evil does not end when your heart stops beating. So while the kings built Persepolis and their armies marched across continents, the real war was being fought in silence, inside every soul, beside every flame. And that war had no end in sight. And that war had no end in sight. Yet the empire that had once seemed unshakable began to feel something unfamiliar at its edges. A slow, creeping exhaustion. Not from the chaos within, but from a rival that refused to break. 4 centuries after Alexander's fire had cooled, Persia rebuilt itself. First through the Parthians, then through a dynasty that looked back at the glory of Cyrus and Darius and decided to reclaim it with an almost obsessive pride. The Sassanians. They rose in the 3rd century after Christ, and they did not ask for permission. They made Zoroastrianism not just a faith but the very skeleton of the state. Fire temples multiplied. Priests gained a voice in every decision. And the king called himself the King of Kings once more, as if the 1,000 years between had been nothing but a bad dream. But here is what made the Sassanian world different. They had a mirror. A rival that watched them as closely as they watched it. Rome. Then Constantinople. The great Christian empire to the west. For over 400 years, these two giants bled each other in a rhythm that became almost ritual. A siege here, a treaty there, a betrayal, a victory, a loss. Neither could finish the other. Neither could walk away. The tension between them was intimate, obsessive, like two old enemies who had forgotten how to live without the other's shadow. And that shadow grew heavier with every generation. The Sassanian armies were magnificent. Their cities glittered. Their art and poetry reached heights that still take your breath. But underneath the gold and the glory, something was quietly cracking. The wars had drained more than treasure. They had drained trust. The nobles no longer followed without question. The priests demanded purity while the world outside grew more complex. And the people, the ordinary farmers and merchants who had once believed the empire was eternal, began to whisper a dangerous question. How long can this last? Then, From a direction no one was watching, a new wind began to stir. Not from Rome, not from the steppes, from the sands of Arabia. A people united by something the Sassanians did not fully understand. Not just an army. A belief so sharp, so certain, that it cut through the old world like a blade through exhausted flesh. And when that blade fell, the empire of fire and kings would not rise again.